I'm not the least bit surprised that Deontay Wilder is a sore loser who has come up with a whole laundry list of excuses for his stoppage defeat to Tyson Fury. Because going into the fight, Wilder's ego had grown completely out of control. He's surrounded by an army of yes men and sycophants who gassed his head up to such an extent that he truly believed he was virtually invincible. He truly believed that all of his rivals, including Fury, were absolutely terrified of him and were quaking in their boots with the thought of facing his monster punch. He truly believed that that monster punch would get him out of any situation he was in a boxing ring. Deontay Wilder turned out to be the classic example of a fighter who believes their own hype. Peter Fury talked about this in an interview back in January, and I made a video about it at the time agreeing with Peter Fury. Peter Fury said that Deontay Wilder is a disaster waiting to happen. Not because Deontay Wilder's not talented, because he is, but because his attitude is all wrong. And his attitude was backed up and encouraged by his army of fanboys who were also saying that all his rivals are terrified and scared, including Fury, and nobody's going to be able to get away from that one right hand. He can get outboxed 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11 rounds in a row, but eventually he's going to land the right hand and knock you out. All these fanboys were impressed by the Luis Ortiz performance. I wasn't impressed. Peter Fury wasn't impressed because what Deontay Wilder showed you in that Ortiz rematch is the blueprint of how to beat him. At least one of the ways to beat him. And that was an old man with no head movement who was slow as molasses. So Deontay Wilder has just had a massive reality check. He's been knocked off his high horse. He had this very lofty image of himself in his head. And now he's found out that the reality is very different than his perception. And he's struggling to come to terms with that. Deep down, he knows that he's not the guy that he thought he was, but he doesn't want to face that. So he's coming up with all these excuses. And that doesn't bode well for Deontay Wilder's future, because if you're ever going to improve as a fighter, you have to come to terms with where you went wrong. And Deontay Wilder isn't doing that. Instead, he's pointing the finger everywhere else other than the place he needs to be pointing it, which is at himself. So to give you an example of some of the excuses this guy's been coming up with, first of all, he blamed the costume that he wore for his ring walk. He said that it jacked up his legs. His legs were hurt from wearing that costume because it was very heavy with the helmet and all the batteries in it. Then he blamed referee Kenny Bayless. He's suggesting that Bayless was maybe on the Fury payroll or something. This is what he seems to be insinuating. He says Bayless let Fury get away with a whole heap of dirty tactics. But the reality is Fury had a point deducted. And the reality is Deontay Wilder has gotten away with all kinds of dirty tactics in many of his previous fights. If you go and look at the first Ortiz fight, he was hitting Ortiz on the back of the head on numerous occasions in that fight and wasn't reprimanded, didn't have a point deducted, at least for some of them shots on the back of the head. So those are some of the excuses. Then, of course, he blamed Mark Breland for throwing in the towel, insinuating that if Breland hadn't done that, he would have been able to catch Fury at some point. The reality is, Wilder was weakening by the second. His punch output was going down and down and down. He didn't have the energy, the strength to muster a knockout blow at that stage. And Tyson Fury wasn't making the necessary mistakes for Wilder to be able to land it anyway. And the worst excuse of all, which I'm now hearing from Deontay Wilder, which is quite literally unbelievable. He's now saying that, or he's implying that there may have been some collusion between Mark Breland and Team Fury. I kid you not, people. He is implying that Mark Breland is some kind of double agent. He said that Mark Breland was sat near Anthony Durrell. And Anthony Durrell is trained by Javon Sugar Hill. And he claims that Anthony Durrell was calling for the referee to stop the fight, or calling for Team Wilder to stop the fight. And he says that Mark Breland was either influenced by that or it was all part of the plan. This is what Wilder's suggesting. You couldn't make it up, people. Thankfully, you don't have to, because Wilder actually said it. So this guy will continue reaching everywhere for excuses. He's not going to be able to improve. Never mind the Fury rematch, because he's doomed in that fight. Not just because Fury's the better fighter, but because Wilder can't see where he went wrong. He's blaming all the wrong things. Mark Breland showed that he actually cared about Deontay. He should retain Mark Breland. You should probably listen to him more. I'm not saying Mark Breland is the greatest coach in the world. He was a good fighter in his day, but good fighters don't always make good coaches. But just the fact that he cares about Deontay's welfare, they should retain Mark Breland in some capacity in the team. But Wilder is not smart enough to see that or understand that. As I've said for a very long time on this channel, Deontay Wilder is an unsophisticated, uneducated, unintelligent yokel. He's a country bumpkin. And that's no disrespect to people from the country. There may be some intelligent people out there in the sticks, but Deontay Wilder is not one of them. He is the stereotypical country bumpkin. And I think people are starting to see this now. Even some of the Wilder fanboys. They're now looking at Wilder and they're saying, nah, this is a bit much now, Deontay. The stuff you're saying is a little ridiculous. Of course it is. Some of them are surprised and disappointed by Deontay Wilder's actions. Well, I ain't surprised. I've been telling you all along, this guy is thick as two short planks of wood. He cannot face what happened to him against Tyson Fury. So he's looking elsewhere. He's looking under the bed for excuses. He'll be searching high and low, worldwide, the whole globe, trying to find more excuses for why he lost. The best place to start, Deontay, is with your attitude. Nobody's scared of you, Deontay. Same message needs to go out to his fanboys. Fury, AJ, Dylan White, these guys are not scared of Deontay. Never have been. He needs to get that in his head first. They're not scared of this incredible punching power. All these guys can punch. As much as he's got the power to knock them out, they got the power to knock him out. I spoke in previous videos about how at the top level, elite fighters tread a thin line between self-belief and self-delusion. Deontay Wilder is very firmly on the side of self-delusion at this point, and he has been for a very long time. Fury is still on the side of self-belief. Again, it's a fine line. AJ was definitely on the side of self-belief. He knew he was a mortal man even before he lost to Andy Ruiz, which is why he came to terms with that loss very quickly, looked at where he went wrong, rectified the mistakes, came back in the rematch and won it. How is Deontay Wilder going to come back? Never mind him facing Fury in a rematch. How is he going to come back moving forward against any of the top guys? Because the cat is out the bag now. Tyson Fury has shown two ways to beat Deontay Wilder. The first way, with movement, you can outbox him. The second way is to pressure him. Now, if you are a shorter heavyweight, you can have head movement and duck underneath his straight right hand so it sails over the top of your head. And once you're on the inside, Deontay Wilder doesn't really have anything for you. And Deontay has never faced a really skilled pressure fighter with good head movement. And if you're a taller guy against Deontay Wilder, all you need to look out for is the straight right hand. Andy Lee told one of the journalists after the Wilder rematch that in training camp they'd studied footage of Deontay Wilder, and obviously Tyson had noticed things in the first fight. And they noticed there was a tell on Wilder's right hand. Whenever he was about to throw it, he would cock his right hand slightly. And they trained Tyson Fury in camp to take a step back every time Wilder did that. So I'm guessing they got the sparring partners to replicate that idiosyncrasy that Wilder has of cocking his right hand before he's about to throw it. And Fury would just take a step back. Very similar tactics to the tactics Vladimir Klitschko used against David Haye. And of course, Vladimir Klitschko was trained by Manny Stewart, Mr. Kronk himself, the uncle of Javon Sugar Hill. Them very same tactics. You see the guy cocking his right hand, take a step back, let the right hand fall short, and then keep him under pressure with the jab. Keep him under pressure. Same tactics Klitschko used against David Haye. So now that cat is out of the bag, other fighters are going to feel more confident against Deontay Wilder than they already were. That there are several ways to beat this guy. Now, obviously, the other heavyweights in the division are not as all-round skilled as Tyson Fury, but they may not have to be. I don't think that Tyson Fury is the only guy in the heavyweight division who can beat Deontay Wilder, especially not now. Wilder's not going to have the same confidence moving forward, and his opponents are going to be way more confident than they were before. I remember when Mike Tyson lost, particularly to Holyfield, not so much the Douglas fight, but when he lost to Holyfield, subsequent opponents fought him with way more confidence. Now, they lost, obviously, people like Andrew Golota, Francois Botha, so on and so forth, that they fought with a confidence that they probably wouldn't have had prior to Tyson losing to Holyfield. I mean, even towards the end of Tyson's career, he was getting beaten up by people like Danny Williams and Kevin McBride because the aura of invincibility was gone. With Deontay Wilder, he never had the aura of invincibility that Mike Tyson had. But still, there was a certain intimidation factor by way of his punching power. I don't think most of his rivals were scared, but they were somewhat wary of the power if they got in the ring with him. I mean, even Tyson Fury in the first fight. But after the first fight, Fury was like, you know what? I'm not that scared of his power. I'm going to put it on him in this rematch. So I think there are very difficult times ahead for Deontay Wilder, and excuses are not going to cut it. You got to come better than that. You got to realize where you went wrong, put the blame where it belongs, which is squarely at your own feet. Look at the man in the mirror, get to know who he really is, because Deontay has been living in a fantasy world. He's had this unrealistic image of himself in his own head for a long time. He needs to get to know his real self. If he does that, maybe he's still got a future in the game. He should go nowhere near Tyson Fury, in my view. But styles make fights. Maybe he can have success against AJ, Dylan White, other people in the division, possibly, if he gets himself together mentally and makes the necessary adjustments. Because if he doesn't, he could end up being a huge disaster. Because Deontay Wilder is 34 years of age. At that age, and with the kind of attitude he has, the odds don't favor him in terms of reinventing himself as a fighter. he's always had glaring technical deficiencies. And boxing history shows us that fighters like that tend to age very badly in boxing terms. Because as they slow down, their technical deficiencies become much more easy to exploit. They don't have that solid foundation of technique to fall back on. So once their reflexes and their speed start to diminish, they end up getting beaten by everybody. Roy Jones Jr. would be the best example of that. And obviously Deontay Wilder is no Roy Jones Jr. But even somebody as incredibly gifted as Roy Jones Jr., and he wasn't as technically deficient as Deontay Wilder by a long stretch. And even he, once he started slowing down in reflexes and speed, started getting caught all the time, started getting stopped all the time. The same thing is going to happen to Deontay Wilder if he carries on with the same attitude. Blaming all these things that really and truly didn't have much to do with his defeat. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Deontay Wilder, excuses, excuses, excuses. When AJ lost to Ruiz, he didn't make no excuses. He understood where the blame lied. Deontay should take a leaf out of AJ's book. That's how you come back. You don't come back by making all these excuses and neglecting to face reality and what really happened to you. So, yeah, let me know, people. It's Hatman, I'm out.
Hatman merch is now available. We got t-shirts, vests, hoodies, and more. Just click the link below. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.